it was basically for health reasons, because my mother was an asthmatic, and she wasn't always a real well woman, and then I was always sick all the time as well.
A doctor just said it was, either Arizona or California, is where she needed to go. And they had some cousins out here, so they initially moved to Irvine for a year or two. So they found a nice little piece of land there and built a home up in Thousand Oaks, moved up there in 1970.
To me, Jack,
Stevie
I don't
wrote.
think he even knew who he was talking to sometimes. We were all kind of one lump thing of his admirers. And he never treated us like a number or anything like that. We were all important to him. But we were just faces and people that would come in and out of his house to tell him our own personal stories about why we would want to make a trek to his house in the first place, why Jack Kirby was so important to us. And that's the way he took it, just as an offering of gratitude and thanks to everyone that would show up at his doorstep.
We had these people, and people would just show up sometimes. I mean, their phone number was listed, and people knew where they lived. And they were some kind of UFO cult. And my father just wanted to take my father with them and beam him up to wherever it is they were. And he just let them in and showed them around. My mom made them lunch, and that's how it was at my house. They were just so
Ross, dá-lhe
open
sanduíche.
to everyone. No one was ever discouraged at all. It was just an open door policy. So they were just real humble people and very caring. My mother was always feeding everybody. Typical Jewish mother, I guess.
The whole family was fun. Jack was great, Roz was great, Neil, Lisa, Barbara. I mean, it was just fun to be there because they were a great family. And they just invited everybody in. No matter who showed up, it was like, hey, come on in, let's have a barbecue, let's go swimming. It was, they were like a second family almost to a lot of people, I think, who would show up there, especially to people who were just starting out in comics who needed, some guidance or something. Jack would say, okay, let me take a look at what you have.
Len and I, when we were kids, went to Jack's house and we watched him draw. I think it was in the Galactus storyline.
One of them. We watched whatever. The most astonishing natural artist I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
He projected it from his head.
It was all there.
Yeah.
It was the whole page was there.
There was I always tell this story because it just to this day blows my mind. There's a famous issue of Tales of Suspense, a splash page for a Captain America story, which is Steve Rogers in an airport. He's not in costume. He's standing there with this portfolio that the shield is hidden in, and there are people walking in front of him in several layers, people walking past him and behind. He's waiting for someone to pick him up. Behind that, there's this huge panoramic window where you see planes taking off and coming in. Watch Jack draw that. He didn't lay anything out. He started drawing in the upper left-hand corner and drew that page to the bottom right.
We've seen him do...
I've never seen anything like that in my life.
We saw him do a hand in one place. Just a hand. No rough sketching. No little blue pencil.
He
no
would
rough...
ask us. Every time we came over, he would do sketches for us. Who do you want this time? Captain America. Okay, cool. And he'd put a fist.
And a foot here, and maybe a belt, maybe, something. And it would connect. It would just connect. It was...
when he was...
Pois é, gurizada. O pessoal fala daquele ilustrador, né? Coreano, que o cara pega e vai fazendo a figura do nada. Mesma coisa, né, cara? Imagina, todo aquele cenário complexo que ele falou do Steve Rogers no aeroporto, sem referência nenhuma, cara.
Of artists plan out the whole thing and figure out his perspective, and at the end he would spend some time balancing his darks, his dark areas, his black areas, and tweaking little parts of the drawing, but the basic construction of the drawing just came out of nowhere.
And don't forget that at the same time while he's doing that, he's got another book he's got to do the following week. So if he was sitting there drawing the Fantastic Four, by the time he got to the last panel in the Fantastic Four page and shipped that off, he had to start the Thor panel 1. And a whole new story with all different characters.
Jack Kirby was one of the most unique artists in the history of art, not just in comic books. And everything Kirby touched was unique. And his imagination spanned so many characters, so many concepts, that they are the types of characters and concepts that keep speaking to new generations. They're not locked into a certain time, although they are of their time. Like things that are universal, Kirby's work, he was a storyteller as well as just an artist. So Kirby's stories, his characters, his visual concepts were both of their time and timeless as well. And you can only find that in very few creators in any field whose work stands the test of time, yet was of its time as well.
He got very excited when he was drawing. He put a lot of himself and a lot of his emotion into the drawing. And a lot of what he was trying to do, I believe, was to create that same kind of emotion in the reader. And that meant stretching anatomy, stretching perspective, sometimes inventing brand new rules of depth perception right in front of your very eyes.
I mean, I don't think Jack really could draw anatomy. I don't think Jack could draw a real car, you know? I don't think that wasn't Jack. He was a visceral animal and drew impressions of things. If you'd sit around with artists and you talk about Jack's anatomy, you go, it would be like, you get the artist that would be critical, you know, and say, he doesn't know how to do anatomy. And then you say, but can you do the power that he can do? Can you do it? Let's just say I ask you to do it. Would you know what to do? Because wouldn't you be essentially held back by what you know and then have to do that? And then guys would say, and they knew it because they'd examined the work.
Well, Jack drew his figures in time. The fist in the foreground in a different time zone is the foot in the back.
Os tempos diferentes
and
da
I think
figura.
he's the only artist I've ever observed who was able to do that. Someone who might just totally blank out the power of his work, might look at something and say, that's a little out of drawing. But that wasn't the case. I mean, Jack, in the beginning, academically knew how to draw the human figure. As he evolved as an artist, he became an impressionist. Then I think he became an expressionist.
He'd had this way of like doing these rounded muscles. Then he'd do this straight line through the muscle that represented sinew. But sinew is something that's very subtle. It has slight curves and it goes like that. Jack would do this straight line, then he'd do a couple of straight lines. And in your mind you go, I know what that is. That's sinew. This is muscle, this is sinew, but it's just a black line. But Jack had this shorthand method of knocking it out. And if you were to say, well, what is that? You know, he has no right to do that. And you go, well, excuse me, I can go to the museums any day and I can say this, I can see the same kind of interpretation done by people whose paintings are selling for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And you're telling me Jack Kirby can't do it? Wrong.
You know, I argue with people. I say, well, listen, this, you know, you're looking at Kirby. Kirby is on a par with Goya when Goya is doing his cartooning. And of course, you know, nobody wants to believe that because Goya's, you know, great artist and Kirby does comic books and comic books are not, you know. But when the first picture of the Mole Man is unbelievable. It's so beautiful.
So me as an artist, it just overwhelms me to see that gutsy, ballsy thing and in a way say to myself, I can't do it. I can't. I would like to be able to, I mean, I can't do it, but maybe I'd corrupt myself if I did it. Ooh, that's danger. You go, ooh, I like to ink it though. I like to do that slashing line.
I mean, all his drawing.
Vocês vejam, cara, o Neil Adams, cara. Neil Adams falou assim, sacava pra caralho de anatomia, cara. Ver o valor, cara, da simplificação da forma, né?
I think he was special because he really defined the vocabulary of superhero comics. I mean, before superhero comics really became the predominant genre within publishing, you know, there's romance comics and westerns and horror, and you know, they're all very successful. Now it's just superheroes, and part of that success, I think, is from what Jack Kirby created, which was the vocabulary. This is how people fly. This is how people smash through brick walls. And this is how you create this kind of godlike power in these figures. You put the legs apart, if you really want to analyze it, you put the legs apart like this, the hips like this, fist, you know, foreshortening, all that kind of stuff. The Kirby crackle, I mean, he invented all this stuff that people just used years, decades afterwards, and we're still building on the sort of core vocabulary that he created, this core code that he created.
É o que eu digo, assim, ó. Olhar o trabalho dele é como tu olhar uma foto de um antepassado teu e tu perceber os traços de fisionomia que fizeram o rosto do teu pai, da tua mãe, que vão estar de repente no teu filho, em ti mesmo quando tu era mais jovem, ou Tu olha todas essas coisas que tiveram origem ali e os autores hoje usando direto, cara.
One of the things I think people didn't understand is that Jack Kirby was a two-person operation. It was Jack and Roz.
Everybody that loved Jack loved Roz, and you couldn't help but do it because, you know, she was there to make sure he was able to entertain us.
Basically, my mother ran the roost.
Yeah, she ran the show. She told all the kids what to do. She laid my father's clothes out, you know, because he would probably be mismatched, and he just didn't care about those things. You know, everyday things just were not that important to him.
If my father had cash in his wallet, it's because she put it there. I mean, she did everything. I mean, my father,
completamente no outro mundo, né? A Roz era o pé no chão.
Eccentric, creative artist, and that, you know, didn't care what he wore. Couldn't screw in a light bulb. That was a family joke. Just in essence, my mother pretty much, she just, you know, ran everything. And my father just kind of did his thing and went along with the flow.
You know, in his younger days, when he worked in a studio with Joe Simon or the other artists, that was one thing. When he finally went to work for Marvel in the late 50s, early 60s, and he worked at home, it got to the point where he was so engrossed in creating the stories and the artwork that he had to give up driving because he couldn't drive anymore. Neil would tell me stories of where he would get in the car with Jack and they'd start driving and they'd just end up on the curb or on the sidewalk because Jack would be just thinking about the next story.
I was waiting, and I don't know what he was thinking, but there was a telephone pole here and the side of a candy store here, and he went up on the sidewalk between them to pick me up. So, yeah. So eventually, by the time we came out to California, that was it for Dad's driving.
So she had to drive for him and just took care of the everyday things of life just so he can do what he did.
Roz was the most wonderful thing that could have happened to Jack. I could not have imagined Jack functioning without her. She was a very strong-willed woman. She cared about his work passionately. She went with him everywhere.
I guess you would call her a pistol. She was so full of energy and life. Just a conversation with Roz, you would laugh, and then you would hear her, you know, she was so feisty. I could not believe the woman was the age she was. And to hear her talk about her husband and all her husband went through. She was obviously his defender and his protector. You know, if you would bring up the name of someone who had slighted Jack in some way, man, I mean, you know, I don't mean to be mean, but the fangs came out. I mean, she would say, oh, that person, you know, they really shouldn't have done that.
She's so patient with him. She puts up with him. I mean, he was such a pain in the ass. Clearly a pain in the ass. And she just smiles benignly, and she makes his world right.
I think she was just one hell of a great lady. This is a woman who could invite into her home, usually without prior notice, a couple of dozen fans, make sandwiches for them, mother them all day long. I mean, that's, I don't know, she was just phenomenal.
I don't think he would have made most of the decisions he made, and I'm not saying those, not the desperate decisions where you have to get work, but making these critical decisions to work on Sky Masters and to do these other things without her, and she never pushed herself forward as the person who did that. But you would see, you can tell when a man turns to a woman and checks her out, and it's benign, you know, she just, it's fine, you know, she lets it go, it's fine. That silent communication speaks volumes.
And she answered the phone. There were times when Jack would, if he answered the phone, somebody would talk him into the worst business deal or the worst promise to do something for free. And Roz would answer the phone and say, no. We'd go to conventions, and Jack would be there. And Jack did not like doing sketches at conventions because they were just sold, and he felt exploited by them. But he also didn't like saying no to people. So Roz would say no to them. And she'd stand by him, and kids would come up and say, Mr. Kirby, will you draw me a thing? And she'd stop him. And if Jack said no, it was because he knew that Roz would get upset. And sometimes, like, she'd have to go to the ladies' room, and she'd turn to me and she'd say, hey, Mark, stand over here and say no until I get back.
I saw some art he had done. There were some Thor pencil pages. I said, Jack, these are great. And he goes, you like them? And we're looking at them. He goes, take them. I'm like, what do you mean take him? And he says, you can have him. This is how Jack was. And I said, can I take 2 of them? It's, rude of me, but he said, sure, take 2. So I take 2 of them. And I just couldn't believe he was handing out this artwork, and I couldn't wait to get it home. And anyway, we get to the door, and Roz says, whoa, where are you going with that? And I said, Jack gave it to me. And she goes, no, Jack didn't give that to you. It goes through me. So obviously I had to hand the pages back, but I ended up buying them a few months later.
She protected him from being exploited, not as well as we might have liked, because Jack was exploited an awful lot in his life. But she managed to keep him at the drawing board every day, and to get rid of all the problems that stopped him from getting to the board and creating the work.
Comic artist's wife has to be a very special person. I could not have survived without Virginia. I don't think Jack would have survived without Roz.
Roz had this knack of, yes, she took care of Jack, but I don't even know if she ever really consciously thought about it. It was just, they were, in my opinion, this incredibly perfect couple. And sometimes I feel that way about myself and my spouse, where you finish each other's sentences. And they were just this perfect unit, and it worked well. And I don't think that, that I don't want to hear some feminist say that she had this secondary role. Bullshit. It was Jack and Roz.
After Jack passed away, Roz had her moment in the spotlight, and there was a strange, in looking for the silver lining in it, there was a nice thing there where she did get that moment, because she was very, very important in his life. She went to the conventions and she was applauded on her own. She got the standing ovation on her own, not as an adjunct to the guy with the pencil.
Because I think what she felt too is she was a little worried that when Dad passed, that's, she might be forgotten and people wouldn't, it was because of Dad they came around, and it wasn't like that at all. And, I really appreciate the support that she did. And I think she always thought of herself, oh, I'm kind of just the woman behind the man, but people really didn't think of her. Like, they called him Jack King Kirby. Well, she was the queen, so, but the outpouring was and the support, and, I can't tell people enough, when she did go to the conventions, she did get a lot of attention, and, made sure that she was still welcome and loved, and we still had family friends and artists that would come by the house and see her from time to time. I know Mike Richardson from Dark Horse came and took time out of his schedule, came to Thousand Oaks, took her out to dinner, and people just kind of went out of their way to make sure that she knew that, she was not going to be forgotten.
I think it's amazing, and I think it's just such a great tribute to my father that even here we are, how many years after his death, and we have all these people still, involved in his life and his artwork.
I do not want my father to be forgotten. And, he helped create this industry. He put people, Marvel where they are today.
Kirby really did. It was really the apex. Really the golden age of comics is really the Marvel age of comics.
He really made the industry what it is today.
He was a far thinker. He used to say things at lunch, like he was the first guy I ever heard say, you will see the day when we will have comic art in museums. And of course we laughed, and within his lifetime it happened. I never envisioned that kind of stuff. I thought comic pages were always going to be considered the trash, throwaway article of the magazine field, and I never thought of elevated grandeur that Jack did. Jack said, we're doing some great stuff here. People notice it, and they're going to notice it even more. Very far thinker.
You can't forget him because he had such a powerful presence.
When you were around Jack, you felt like a better writer or a better artist. It may have been illusory in some of us, but the same way Jack would draw these people who radiated energy in his comics, he radiated a certain energy, it was creative energy.
Because he took his abstract thoughts, and I'm using the word correctly, there is an abstract thought, turning it into energy, and he transferred it to paper.
He just really knew his art. And he wasn't stuck. I mean, he was creating. He was always creating the world of the comic book, rather than fitting into something that was already created.
I think he was a watershed artist for comics, in that there's a lot of art in comics over the years, and there are very few guys, I think Jack is one of them, maybe Jack is the only one. There's, from his work in the 60s especially, and he was quite good back in the 40s and 50s too, but in the 60s, once he remade the language of superhero comics, he remade it visually. And so what you have is you have artists who are pre-Kirby, and you have artists who are post-Kirby.
Gurizada. E aí? Não sei se vocês... Com certeza vocês conheciam esse documentário. Acho que a última vez que eu vi ele foi em 2016, assim... Ó, tem o endereço do Kirby Museum, né? Então, se vocês forem procurar o documentário na internet... podem ver. O foco do documentário. Não, o foco do documentário pega esse período da Marvel, que ele é extremamente significativo. Eles não se aprofundaram tanto, né, na DC Comics, até porque a DC Comics foi uma passagem de 2 anos, né? Então, se você pegar o período de Atlas, pós-DC e pré-DC, a gente tem, e Timely também, né? Tu tem 30 anos, né, da carreira do Kirby dentro da Marvel. Então, se não me falha a memória, ele foi produzido ali na primeira metade dos 2000, né? Tanto que tem ali o Jeff Lubb, o Tim Sale, o Jim Lee tava ainda com a Wildstorm ainda. Ao meu ver, foi um apanhado geral da carreira dele, fico no período mais prolífico dele. Pois é, Tunani, justamente esse período prolífico dele na Marvel, né, meio que refletiu também a ida dele para DC, né, que apesar dele ter criado muitos conceitos, a ida dele para DC tem muito dessa bagagem estética que ele meio que reinventou, como foi o caso do que o Walt Simonson falou aqui, né, que ele meio que ele reinterpretou todo o conceito de quadrinho de super-herói, porque se tu pegar o quadrinho de super-herói no surgimento ali com o Superman, tu ainda tinha muito dessa visão bidimensional, né, que é a entrada de Kirby, de Eisner, e começa a botar a profundidade, o design diferente das páginas, né? Quando tu entra no período ali da década de 50, isso regride no quadrinho de super-herói, o próprio quadrinho de super-herói ele enxuga, né? Ele começa a ficar naivo, ficar ingênuo, né? E quando vem a Marvel, ele reinventa, né, a roda, vamos dizer assim. E esse documentário ele foi escolhido junto com os apoiadores do canal, então você pode também se tornar um apoiador do canal e fazer parte do nosso grupo do Telegram. Fez uma enquete lá, teve a votação do pessoal. Quero agradecer do fundo do coração, espero que vocês tenham gostado dessa experiência, foi bacana. Eu já andei separando mais algumas coisas e a gente provavelmente vai assistir aqui junto, tá?